could you do that to Bobby and JFK? You took freedom.
Sergeant H.B. McLain of the Sheriff's Department, and we sure appreciate your time that you're giving us today. And we're also here with Steve Barber, who's done some extensive acoustical work concerning the involvement that they tried to get you involved in H.B. McLain. And we're also here with Greg James, video consultant to the Patsy Paschal film. And Sergeant McLain, when did you start for the Dallas Police Department?
1953.
And what capacity were you hired at?
I was patrolman.
Patrolman. And at what point did you switch over to the Sheriff's Department?
Oh, I switched over to the Sheriff's Department in 1981 after I retired from the city.
From the city. And of course, on November 22nd, 1963, you were working at that time?
Yes, sir.
And what was your assignment for that day?
I was in the motorcade for the President's escort.
And as you went through the downtown area, of course we know that as you went down Main Street and then the motorcade proceeded down Houston and went down Elm, there were shots fired at President Kennedy. And was there a particular point in time that you heard any shots, or at what point did you know that something had happened?
You know, I was stopped in about midway of the block there on Houston while they were turning the corner.
Midway on Houston?
Yeah, I was sitting still.
And then did you speed up again and head for the hospital?
Not until the chief come on the radio and said, head for Parkland.
Head for Parkland. It's been 32 years, but is there any type of time frame from that point that you would have headed to the hospital?
From the time he said that?
From the time you stopped?
Oh, maybe a half a minute.
Half a minute? Okay.
Minute, something like that. Time enough, there was about 6 cars, I guess, had made the corner.
So your basic assignment was to ride with the motorcade, and then you proceeded on to Parkland Hospital.
Yeah.
And what did you do at Parkland Hospital?
Well, I helped get Miss Kennedy out of the car after we got out there. She didn't want to get out, so I finally got to help her get out and walked her on into the hospital. And I turned around and come back outside and stood around until there was somewhere else for us to go.
I imagine it was mass confusion.
Well, I wound up escorting Johnson back out to the airport to go back to Washington.
When you arrived at Parkland, were you able to see President Kennedy or Governor Connally?
Yeah. Well, you couldn't tell a whole lot about Kennedy because she was laying across his head. But I didn't make no effort to look. They kept trying to get her to let them have him so they could take him on in. And I just reached over and caught her by the shoulders, so come on, let them take him on in. And got her out of the car, and I walked her on in the hospital.
And then after that, you just came back to police headquarters?
Yeah. And then whenever they finally decided that he was dead and that Johnson carried him back out to Air Force One, and he was sworn in out there as president.
And when we talked on the phone, you had some reservations about Lyndon Johnson, or did you feel that maybe there was some that he had a dislike for the Kennedys, or is that something you said on the... No? Okay. All right.
I don't comment on that.
Okay. And then, of course, later, basically, there wasn't any attention drawn to you until in the 70s, and you were contacted by the House Select Committee on Assassinations?
Well, yeah, first, though, they started looking for an scapegoat for that microphone. And they wanted to know where I was at. I told them where I was at. They said, that's a perfect spot.
Did you, when they contacted you, did they tell you everything they were interested in or what it was about? And
no.
No, they did not. Okay. Then you got a subpoena, or was it a summons to go to Washington?
It was just a summons.
It was a summons. But they, and they were questioning you about where you're at in the motorcade and if it could have been your microphone that was stuck open. Is that what they were doing? but they did not let you hear the...
No, I asked them if I could hear the tapes, and they said, no, you don't need to hear them. And every question they asked me could be answered as a possible. They could all be answered possible.
Possible. But what would you have told them if they would have allowed you to hear the dictabelt recording?
I tell them, hell no, it wasn't my radio.
And the reasons you would have given them for that are?
Because I could hear what was going on. And I also could tell that the microphone was on the three-wheeler, not on the solo.
And wasn't there something about sirens that would have been on that recording?
Well, according to the other, on the recording, it showed the sirens coming up and then going away.
They have a video from the motorcade procession that they said was you reaching down to turn on or switch on your microphone, and that's where they got the idea that they thought it was your stuck open microphone. Can we play a segment for you, and you can let us know whether that is you or not? Why don't we play that, and we can find out if that's you or not in the motorcade procession.
All right.
Sergeant McLain, we just would like you to look at this film of a motorcycle officer on Main Street approaching Houston and find out if this could be you.
Yeah, it could be.
Now, the person is reaching down. Where was your microphone
He
switch?
wasn't reaching down. He just laid his hand across it. You can see his hand on the inside of his leg.
Okay. And the microphone would have been...
My microphone's up on the crossbars, on the handlebars, up on the right-hand side.
I see.
Okay, Mr. McLain, we just got through seeing the segment that showed what may be you reaching down, doing something on the motorcycle, and you say that that is, it couldn't be the microphone because your microphone was up on the handlebars.
That's right.
Okay, that's a good point that we wanted to establish. Okay, when you made the turn from Main Street onto Houston, in the Hughes film, and I believe that you were shown frames of that in the House Select Committee, you said that was you that was swinging wide around the corner, and you could see Mayor Cavill's car in the background. You know what I'm talking about?
They're swinging around on to Houston, yeah.
Right. Now, how far down Houston Street did you go before you changed the pace of your motorcycle speed?
About midway of the block, and then I stopped.
And what caused you to stop at that point?
Well, the traffic had slowed up because they was making their turn onto Elm Street. And there's no need me running up there and getting in that because they got to make their turn. And if they make their turn and take off, then I pull on up.
So it was customary that if the rest of the motorcade stopped, you would generally stop where you were
Right.
at in the motorcade.
Right.
Okay, now while you were stopped, did you notice anything?
Yeah.
Okay, did you notice anything pertinent to the assassination while you were stopped?
I heard one shot. I looked up, seen all that bunch of pigeons fly off behind that school book depository.
Did you notice anything else while you were stopped?
No. Well, I turned back around and seen Miss Kennedy up on the back of the limousine.
And you saw her over the wall, or how were you able to see her?
You can see through that. It's sort of like lettuce work, but you can see through it in places.
You're referring to the square ornamental holes that are in
Yeah.
the wall. And you could see Mrs. Kennedy
Yeah.
at that point?
About that time, the chief come on the radio and said, head for Parkland.
Okay, now as you discussed in your House Select Committee, you thought your microphone was set on channel 1.
I said it could possibly be.
Right. Now, do you know what channel the chief broadcast that on?
Right now, no, I couldn't.
Okay, I think they determined in the House Select Committee that was on channel 2.
We had one and two, and it's been a while.
Right. So if your microphone was on channel 1 and it was stuck on, as some people say, would you be able to hear him say that over your radio?
No, you couldn't hear anything. Maybe a lot of static.
Okay, now, when you did hear the chief say to go to the hospital, at that point, what did you do?
I took off, headed for Parkland
Okay, when did you turn your siren on?
immediately.
This is while you were on Houston Street?
Well, probably not, because it was foot operated, and you got to have speed for it to work. And I imagine it was after I got on Elm Street where I could get a little speed to make it make a noise.
Now, when you reached the triple underpass, do you think that you had your siren on at that point?
I know I did.
Okay, and then was there any cars on the ramp or any confusion on the ramp that would have blocked your way as you were trying to catch
No,
up?
because they had all that blocked off because that's the way the procession was going to go.
And you caught up. I believe you said in your House Select testimony that you caught up with the motorcade at the Hyatt House or the Continental Street.
Right along in there, yes.
Okay, now were the other motorcycles sirens operating?
Yeah.
Okay, their sirens were going and your sirens were going.
Right.
And then did your siren continue all the way to Parkland Hospital?
Yeah. It was louder at points that whenever we had to slow up to make a turn or something other, it would get quieter because you can't keep it going while you're turning.
How long do you think it took you to get to Parkland Hospital from, say, the triple underpass?
Let's say a minute, minute and a half,
Okay.
maybe 2 minutes.
Sounds that would be recorded on a stunt microphone that would be different from a, what you call a solo motorcycle or a three-wheeler?
Well, whatever sound is on the three-wheeler, it's real, what you'd say, loose, chattery like. And on the solo, it just hits a solid lick. The three-wheeler sound like a thrashing machine.
Is there any doubt in your mind that perhaps there was more to it than just Lee Harvey Oswald, or how do you feel? As an investigative officer, I ask all the law enforcement officers that I've interviewed how they feel as far as how the evidence went down, and do they feel that, with Oswald's activities in Russia and different things he was able to do, and the physical evidence, is there anything that you question or that you're wondering about?
Yeah, I question about him being the only one involved, because I've done a little hunting of my own, and I've never shot anything that went away from me and then come back to me. Usually they hit the ground rolling if they're running, or they just fall. But on these films I've seen, it shows his head going away from the school book depository and then coming right back. I feel like that there's somebody over on that railroad track shot him the second time.
One of the things they did put into the evidence was a bullet that had went through Kennedy and hit Governor Conway, and it caused a total of 7 wounds, and it lost less than 2 grains of lead. How do you feel about that?
Said that one and done all that zigzagging?
Yeah. Well, I know bullets do strange things, but the point is a bullet out of the box weighed 161 grains, and the one they
But
found...
if it hits something other to ricochet, it's going to batter that bullet. And the way I understand it, that was a perfect bullet.
The tip of it was, yes. The base of it was flattened slightly.
Do you have any evidence that the bullet did zig around? I mean, do you know anything?
No, I don't. I didn't have nothing to do with the investigation part
You just
of it.
know
All
what
I've
you've
done
heard.
was escort it, and what I've seen on these all different various tapes.
So you have no particular knowledge of the path of the bullet
No.
other than what the general public has seen?
Well, thank you very much, Sergeant McLain. We really appreciate your time and
All right.
effort, and we really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay.
That was very good. That was very good on those.
And what you did to Martin, oh, someday you're gonna pay. And I'll stand in the broad daylight, shout your name.
We're here with Mr. Ronald B. Fischer, and I'd certainly like to thank you for taking the time to do this interview. And Mr. Fischer, you were a resident of Dallas in 1963?
Well, actually a resident of Mesquite, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas.
And where did you work at in 1963?
The Dallas County Auditor's Office, 407 Records Building, downtown Dallas.
And in November of 1963, of course, you knew that President Kennedy was going to come to visit Dallas?
Yes.
And when you found out that he was coming to Dallas, did you know a specific route that he was going to take, or were you aware of what type of route he was going to take downtown? Or
It seems to me that I recall a newspaper article a day or two before his arrival that showed the route of the motorcade, but I'm not sure about that. It seems like I did know.
According to your Warren Commission testimony, your boss let you and your friend Mr. Edwards off early
Yes.
to go out and watch the president.
Watch the parade.
And when you decided to watch President Kennedy's motorcade route, where did you stand at or take a position at?
Well, the final location where we were going to view the motorcade from was the southwest corner of Elm in Houston, directly across the street from the Texas School Book Depository.
And is that where you stayed during the motorcade route, or did you move at any time?
Well, after the shots rang out, Bob and I ran west down Elm Street to approximately the area directly across the street from where the young man and his wife, the Newmans, I believe you call them, and their 2 children were laying on the ground, and at that point we crossed Elm Street toward the grassy knoll and toward the couple that was on the ground. They were picking themselves up off the ground when we got to them, and Bob or I once said, "What happened?" And the woman was hysterical and crying, and I believe the children were crying. They were very small. But anyway, the man was visually upset, but he did say they've shot the president. And Bob and I didn't believe him.
Did you see President Kennedy go down Houston Street and then make the left turn on Elm before you were aware of any shots? Did you see
Yes.
that part of it?
Yes.
And prior to the shots, did you look at the Texas School Book Depository building?
Bob was the one who called my attention to this man that was sitting in the window, the 5th or 6th floor, I don't remember which, but he called my attention to it, and I don't know why he did, but I looked up at the man when he called my attention to him, and I stared at him for a little while because of the fact that he seemed not to be looking for the parade, but rather sitting transfixed and staring, very still, and looking toward the triple underpass, rather than through the parade route, or to the parade route, which was going to be coming down to his left. I thought it was a little unusual, and everybody was milling around and talking and laughing and carrying on and whatnot, and this man seemed to be very still and transfixed. I just thought it was unusual.
Did you notice anybody else in the windows? Did that kind of catch your attention or anything? Or?
It seems to me that on a lower floor, maybe the floor directly below the 5th or 6th floor, I'm not sure. It seems like there were 2 or 3 colored fellows, but I'm not sure about that. It seems like at some point before the parade, there was somebody in one of the other windows, but I'm not sure.
And this window that you saw, the person that seemed to be transfixed, staring in another direction, did the window appear to you to be like half open, or?
I think the window was fully open.
Fully open at that time. And you did say he seemed to be transfixed. I think you said something about he never moved his head and he never seemed to move anything, just was there transfixed.
Yes.
So, and I think later in your testimony, you also said that you couldn't see, or you did not notice if he had been holding anything, or is that true?
I never saw his hands, and I never saw if he was holding anything. I could see from about the middle of his chest up past the top of his head, but I never saw another instrument in the window. I could see some cases behind him, or what appeared to be boxes of some sort.
When the shots occurred, was there, to your best recollection, was there any definition as to whether the first one might have been closer than the second, or did it seem like an even space that the shots occurred?
I don't recall. I really don't recall.
Do you recall how many shots you thought you might have heard?
I originally said in my deposition in the sheriff's office that there were 4 shots, and there were a number of people who had claimed that they heard 4 shots. However, I began to question that because I just simply could not remember exactly how many shots there were. it's like trying to remember if there was 8 or 9. You know, it's a little easier with 3 or 4, but it becomes more difficult with 8 or 9, and even still more difficult with 19 or 20. So I don't know if there were 3 or 4 shots. I thought there was 4, and I had explained that to the investigator, Mr. Boleyn. I still think that there were probably 4 shots, but I couldn't swear to it.
And did you give an opinion as to what direction they might have came from?
No.
Okay. And then in your testimony, I believe you were trying to say, or were asked, the description of the person you saw in the window.
Yes.
And I think you were kind of giving the impression that the person might have had more of a darker color hair than lighter color. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And I believe you did say that, I guess after the shots occurred, you never did look back at the window.
No, I did not. Well, actually, before the shots occurred, when the motorcade came around the corner from Main Street and turned onto Houston, I stopped looking at the man then and directed my attention the opposite direction.
Quite naturally so, yes. And you did say in your testimony that after the first shot you thought it was a firecracker.
I did.
And then when you were asked in your Warren Commission testimony where did the shots appear to be coming from, you said they appeared to be coming from just west of the school book depository. There were some railroad tracks and there were some railroad cars there.
I was just guessing. The sound bounces around in that part of town, and I don't know that anyone has ever fired a rifle in that part of town before, and I certainly wasn't there if they did, so I was strictly speculating on that.
And then in your testimony you said you ran up to the top of the hill there where all the Secret Service men had run thinking that the bullets had come from, and they seemed to be searching that area. They jumped off their cars and ran up the side of the hill there and onto the tracks where the passenger freight cars were. Did you actually see people jump off their cars?
No, I did not.
Okay.
And I didn't see anything about...
Perhaps, I think there were some newspaper reporters that had jumped off their cars, cameramen. Could that have been...
There were some officials that were at the top of the grassy knoll. But as far as looking past that fence there into that railroad yard, I did not. I didn't even get that far. When Bob and I ran up the grassy knoll toward the fence area, there were officials already there, and I believe there was a Dallas police officer there. There was a uniformed officer there. And somebody in that group said, "Don't come up here." And so we went on back down the hill where the Newmans were.
I see.
And then eventually crossed Elm Street and went back to work. There were a lot of people up at the top of the grassy knoll. There were a number of people, and I believe one of them was a uniformed Dallas police officer.
The reason I asked that is there were 3 policemen, well actually 2 policemen and 1 deputy constable that told the Warren Commission that within 10 minutes of the shooting that they were either shown or told that they were in the presence of Secret Service. And they testified that to the Warren Commission. One of them's in the video I gave you, Sergeant Harkness. And then the House Select Committee determined that all the Secret Service men had stayed with the motorcade and had gone to the hospital, and only 1 had come back about 30 to 40 minutes after the shooting. So the question was, and it was even written up in the newspaper, you know, who were these men that these policemen reported were Secret Service?
I had heard that story.
So that's three policemen that at the time had no reason to lie. I mean, you know, to me, it just appears that if you were running into detectives or FBI agents, you would say that. You know, that's what I thought was interesting. Yeah. And then when you were testifying and Mr. David Bellin was taking your testimony, did he, I believe you said that he became upset because you were honestly and openly just saying what you thought the man's hair and his description And isn't that true? He was kind of upset, or?
Oh, he was very upset, not just kind of upset. The deposition does not indicate any pause in the deposition. There was, however, at least one pause, and maybe several, but I do remember at least one occasion where he became so upset that he told the stenographer to stop, and he abruptly got up and left the room for some time. And the stenographer and I sat there in the room waiting for him to come back. After some period of time, 5, 10, 15 minutes, he came back, seemed to have collected himself, was very calm, sat down behind his desk, and began the deposition again. Now, the deposition does not indicate this pause, or any of these pauses, if there was more than one, and there may have been more than one. He took issue with me over the number of gunshot wounds, or the number of gunshots, rather, and the color of the man's hair. At the time, I did not understand why he was so upset about it, and I think I understand it now, but then I did not.
Well, in later years, there was a newspaper article, which is how I thought about you more, that I believe Earl Goals wrote. I may be mistaken, and it was in the 70s, and he wrote that that you had said that he, meaning David Bellin, and I almost got into a fight over the color of the man's hair. And I thought that was kind of interesting that you were there and David Bellin was not, and you're trying to give your testimony, and you're saying that he was unhappy with the way that you were describing the person.
Very unhappy.
So and I believe also you said at one point in time that a deputy from the deputy sheriff's office came up and asked you if you were Ronald Fischer, and
yes,
and you said yes, and
that was the day of the assassination.
And he said that Sheriff Decker wanted to see you.
I'm not sure if he said Sheriff Decker wants to see me. He said he might have said you're wanted in the sheriff's office.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where, I don't know, a dozen or so people had been collected who were witnesses. The Newmans, for instance, were there. When I got down there, they still had their children with them. Sometime later on in the afternoon, someone came and got the children, but they more or less locked us up in there. There was also a gentleman in the sheriff's office who had a movie camera. And I don't know if that was Mr. Zapruder or not, but there was someone in there who had a movie camera, and the news media was standing outside the office area there, and the office was covered on at least one side by glass, and they were making bids on his camera and putting it up to the window, and writing it on a piece of paper and putting it up to the window, and he would shake his head, and then they would up the ante, and then they would put it back up on the window, and he would shake his head again. And then someone came into Sheriff Decker's office and took his camera from him. So that settled that. I don't know if he ever got his camera back or not. And I don't remember
Service.
if it was a still camera movie. I don't remember.
They came in and took it from him.
Oh yeah, they came in and got it. Somebody discovered that apparently that he thought at least he had some pictures of something. And outside of Mr. Decker's office, or Sheriff Decker's office, there were a number of newsmen, NBC, CBS, ABC, I don't know who all they were, but they had camera crews.
Someone from CBS was trying to bid on the film, and I think they only offered him like $50,000, and he
well,
just
I never
laughed.
did see the amounts because I was sitting on the other side of the room. The officer, the motorcycle officer, who was at the left rear of the presidential limousine, was also there. The one that was splattered.
Mm-hmm.
He was there for some time. I remember seeing him because they told him not to take his uniform off, not to wash his uniform. So he said he told this person that he was uncomfortable with wearing it, and they said, well,
This is the officer?
this is the police officer.
Probably was Bobby Hargis, the guy
Might
in
have
your
been.
video. He had
Anyway,
to
they
be.
instructed him, no, it didn't make any difference whether he was uncomfortable or not. He should keep it on.
Because there were two, Hargis and B.J. Martin both testified that they got hit with.
Yeah.
And just going back to when you saw the man in the window, what if you could approximate a time as to relationship to when Kennedy came by? Do you know about what time that would have been?
Well, it was just a few minutes before the motorcade came by, because I was staring at the figure in the window when the motorcade came off of Main Street and turned onto Houston. So it would have been just moments before the the motorcade came by.
And you didn't, see anything. It's been purported that Oswald shot from that window, but you did not see anything in his hands or
No, I did
anything.
not. Never saw the man move.
Never saw the man move.
Never saw his hands.
You, you were there, and going to the source is the very best thing you can do when you're doing any type of investigative work. Firsthand information is the best. After what you saw and heard that day, and maybe the revelations that might have taken place since then with different investigative bodies, do you feel, as a personal opinion, that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, or that there were more involved and possibly there might have been a wider spread conspiracy?
Well, I think that there was a wider spread conspiracy, and Oswald was undoubtedly part of the conspiracy, but I suspect that he didn't know it. I think it's just like he said in the hallway of the Dallas Police Department, City Hall down there, was that he was a patsy. They had him set up for this, I think. That's just my personal opinion. There were a lot of other people involved in this. It's always curious to note political assassinations, to me anyway. If you really want to kill someone, you triangulate the fire with a rifle. Now, and that appears to have been what has happened here. And there's the result, as anyone can see, is pretty conclusive. It's difficult to imagine that even if you assume that there were only 3 shots, how one man could have fired 3 shots, one being completely and totally fatal. I don't know. It's just a feeling that I have. I don't think Oswald knew what was going on until the shooting started, and then I think he knew what was happening then and knew he was in trouble, even though he didn't have anything to do with it. That's why he fled to Oak Cliff, killed Officer Tippit, and so on. Everything seemed to be fine with Oswald until he met Tippit. Mm-hmm. He was calm. People noticed he was walking down the street.
He gave a lady his cab, let her go first.
He went to his apartment, got his gun, his pistol, assuming he didn't have it beforehand, and I don't think he did. Got his pistol, walking down the street, Officer Tippit stops him, he shoots Tippit, suddenly he's in a panic. Why now? He's just shot a policeman, yes, but supposedly just before that he'd shot the President of the United States and he was calm.
Hmm?
Doesn't make sense.
When the policeman, Marion Baker, met him on the first floor, or second floor, he pulled his gun on Oswald, and Oswald was looking right down the barrel, and of course the manager vouched for him, but the officer later testified that he was not sweating or shocked or jumped or was just as cool as a cucumber, and supposedly was drinking a Coke. And later the testimony was, there was an addendum to it to say that he hadn't yet purchased a Coke, but that kind of added on to the time frame of him getting downstairs. Mm. When you gave your Warren Commission testimony, you did say that your friend Bob Edwards was asked if you wanted to come back and authorize it or sign it.
Yes, his deposition, as per the Warren Commission report, shows that Mr. Boleyn offered to have the deposition typed up and have him review it and correct it and sign it if he so desired. But Mr. Boleyn also told him, as my understanding in Bob Edwards' deposition, that he could waive that if he wished. Bob chose to waive it because he said he did not want to come back. I was never given the option one way or the other. In fact, it was never mentioned to me about either looking at the deposition afterwards, making any correction. None of that was ever mentioned at the end of my deposition. I don't know. That's the way Mr. Boleyn handled the whole thing. In retrospect, I very much question Mr. Boleyn's either his ability or his charge from the Warren Commission. I don't know what axe he was grinding at the time, but I suspected that they had the solution to the assassination figured out before they had the previous facts, and so they had to make the previous facts fit the solution of the situation. When you look at it in that respect, then a lot of the attitude that Mr. Boleyn showed me makes sense, but it's difficult to imagine another situation that would have caused Mr. Boleyn to act the way he did. barring that particular scenario. So I don't know. At the time I was 24, 25 years of age, and this man was an official. He was hired by the federal government to do this investigation, and I was respectful of it, and if he wanted to get mad, then I sat there and let him get mad.
Which he did.
Which he did, and eventually left the room. He was so mad, at least on one occasion, if not several. Looking back on it now, I probably would have insisted on signing the deposition or making sure that the stenographer noted that he became extremely angry. I never did. That was extremely puzzling to me at the time. I could not understand. I thought the man felt bad or something. I couldn't figure out why he seemed to be so upset with me. I was being as helpful as I could, and I certainly wasn't mad at him.
You could speak to Mr. Bellin and could ask him a question. Is there anything that you would like to say to him, or?
Not really. I have listened to several speeches that Mr. Bellin has given to various organizations in recent years, and I have about as little respect for him now as I probably should have had for him when he took my deposition. I just don't care for the man, and I'm sure he had a job to do. I just don't think that he probably should have accepted the charge to take the depositions. If you're going to do a job, then I've always thought that you ought to do the best you can with it. And I suspect that Mr. Bellin knew that he was not going to do his best.
Mr. Fischer, thank you again for your time, and I appreciate it very much, and I think you'll enjoy this video when it comes out.